Welcome to Ayurveda and Spirituality with your host, Alakananda Ma, a renowned Ayurvedic expert and a graduate of a top London medical school. She is the principal of Alundi Ayurveda Gurukula, a unique apprenticeship-style school in Boulder, Colorado. She is a spiritual mother, teacher, flower essence maker, and storyteller. Join us as we uncover the timeless principles of Ayurveda, discover practical tips for enhancing vitality, and explore the deeper dimensions of spirituality that intertwine with the ancient science of life.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Welcome to Satsang. Satsang is a meeting of hearts, a gathering of friends to inquire into the truth. Today is an auspicious day as we are beginning our study of the Upanishads, following in a tradition of thousands of years of people who sat at the feet of their teachers to study the Upanishads, because the Upanishads are the proximate means to the knowledge of the self. It's not particularly about the person of the teacher. It's the only proximate means to realize the self is to study the Upanishads. That's what it says in the Upanishads. The quick way is the proximate, the near means to realize the self is through the Upanishads. What's going to happen today is that we're going to lay some groundwork by looking into the levels of understanding scripture. When we approach a scripture, how do we approach it to get the most out of it? In the Christian tradition, how do we do the Lectio Divina, the sacred reading? Back when I was a nun in the Cistercian Abbey, our time was supposed to be divided into 3 8-hour blocks, because 3/8 are 24, 8 hours for sleep, which included all your like personal stuff you had to do, 8 hours for work, like for me, digging up cabbage stumps and moving molehills in the garden, and 8 hours that was for prayer and reading. Lectio Divina, or another way you can say it is the monastic path consists of manual labor, Lectio Divina, sacred reading, and prayer and chanting, especially the Psalms, which were considered as absolutely the most important thing you could do. So we're going to look at this from 2 viewpoints. The first is what's known as Pardes, which is from the Jewish standpoint, how do we approach a scripture? And we approach a scripture through 4 levels. So the first is the Peshat, which is the plain, the simple, or the direct meaning. Like if we're going to be having a story in the Upanishads where the gods come to a great teacher and ask him to reveal the knowledge of the self, we're going to simply take that the gods came to a great teacher and were asked to reveal the knowledge of the self, and they were told to go look in a pool and see their own reflection, and that was the self, and most of them left, but one didn't. So that's just the plain, simple meaning. Just kind of like approaching a text the same way we would see the newspaper or any other thing where we're just going to like read it and take it for its surface value. But then you have the ramaz, the hints. This is a meaning that's hinted at in the text, that is a deep, hidden, or symbolic meaning that goes just beyond the literal sense. So it looks like it's saying this thing, but there's a deeper or a hidden or a symbolic meaning to this. So I should look a little deeper into this text, and I should try to understand this symbolic meaning. Then there is the darash, inquiring, seeking, and that's a comparative meaning. Well, we're going to say, okay, so there's this story here, but then if we think about it, there's other similar stories that happened in other places in our scriptures. And the other times this thing happened. So let's sort of like lay them out and compare them. And if we put them all together, maybe we'll get a greater depth in it. And then there is the sword, the secret, the mystery. That is an esoteric or mystical meaning. And this one, you can't just figure it out. You only get that meaning. It comes to you. It's an inspiration. It's a revelation. It's the moment that the text comes to life and becomes what I was saying at the beginning, the proximate means of realization. You read the text, okay, this is a cool story. All the gods are going to the teacher, but some of them go away and get satisfied too soon. Oh, but maybe that means something about me. That would be the hint level. Maybe I should make sure I don't get put off by a pat answer and I come back and I ask for more. Oh, what about the comparative level? Are there other stories where people go to teachers and ask for teachings, and the teacher tries in various ways to fob them off? There's this story and there's this story. We can compare all these stories, lay them all out together, see what we can read in between these stories. And then there is the sword. You sit with the text. You sit with the text, and at one moment you get it. I mean, I've been studying the Upanishads since I was 28. It's a pretty long time. At least since I was 28. I remember first studying the Upanishads, but I'd already been reading them because I had my own copy, right, translated into English. And I was sitting up in the hills in this ashram in Kerala, and you read it, and there's this crack, and he almost gets it. You kind of have a funny feeling that like it does really mean something, but somehow you don't quite fall through that crack. It doesn't quite open up. You're like, this is very meaningful. And it's exciting to me that it means that, but have I awakened? Maybe not. And when people really study Kabbalah, this Pardes has to do with Kabbalah. There's a moment when you're reading, and when the four letters of the unpronounceable divine name appear in letters of fire before you, and that's when you get it. When you go beyond like what you're reading and you're studying and these big heavy books and your hunter, it's like, whoa, something is actually appearing to me. I'm having an awakening. And Sarah, you probably know there are four children in this Passover Seder. There are four children, and they all ask questions about the Seder. Why is this night different from all other nights? And the children have different natures and they get different kinds of answers. There's one child who, the first child represents that literal level. He wants to know exactly the details of how we do it. The next child wants to know, what does it really mean? And so on. But there's the one that's sometimes called as the naughty child, doesn't ask any questions. And it can be a little confusing to understand why are there four children when I'm just like, I'm not really there. I'm not really asking a question. That the naughty child actually represents the highest level of understanding. The naughty child's not just going through a ritual, not just hearing a story of how a people crossed from slavery to freedom. The naughty child has gone onto this, the foolish child, the naughty child, has gone onto this other level where they can't even really participate because they're on this other level. It's like the story of Ramakrishna, the great Saint Ramakrishna, who lived in Calcutta in the late 19th century. He says, first of all, you're having your beads and you're reciting Om Shikali, Om Shikali, Om Shikali Ma, Om Shikali. You're reciting the whole mantra, and then you start to get a little more into it, and you're just sort of Kali, 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 and then you get a little more into it, and then finally, well, the mantra's gone. You're gone. So that's that fourth level, and that's that naughty child or that foolish child who doesn't even you remember all those, right? Doesn't even ask a question. It's actually supposed to be because they're there on a whole nother level. They represent that place where we have no more questions. So I actually came to this first from the Christian exegesis that I learned when I was in the Abbey. And then when I started studying with Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, we started studying Kabbalah and Chassidut. We started studying the Jewish mysticism. I thought, oh, the Christians didn't make this up. They got it from somewhere else. It was pretty interesting. So on the Christian exegesis, it says, litera gesta docet, quid credas allegoria, morales quid agas, quod tendas anagogia. So that translates, the letter shows us what God and our ancestors did. The allegory shows us where our faith is hid. The moral meaning gives us the rule of daily life. The anagogy shows us where we end our strife. So it's kind of four levels that are kind of really similar to the Pardes. I'd have to say the Christian exegesis is not the same as the Pardes, the Jewish way of approaching it, because in the Jewish way of approaching it, when you get to that hinted level, that second level, it's also about the actual letters. It, so it's about the actual Hebrew letters that you're reading on the page. So you can't even really do it if you're doing it in a translation, because you're getting stuff from the actual letters and how the actual letters come together. And that you don't see the same thing in the Christian texts because they're translations of translation. Everyone was back in those days was studying the Vulgate, which was a translation of the whole Bible into Latin, but it was a translation of the entire Hebrew Bible into Latin and the entire New Testament, which was written in Greek into Latin. So you can't have quite the same thing that you have when you're studying the Torah, and it's the actual letters. And oh, this letter next to this letter because every letter has a meaning. When I see this letter next to this letter, forgotten about what the actual story is, there's a hint there. So it goes into a lot of depth about the actual sacred importance of each and every letter. With the something on the internet. Mhm. With the Christian exegesis, it's a little bit different but similar. But first, litera gesta docet. The letter tells us exactly what happened. So you're taking a Bible story, or in our case, one of the stories in the Upanishads. You're taking that story and you're just really thinking about what happened. And the Jesuits took this really, really far. So you have this thing called spiritual exercises that the Jesuits teach, where you have a story. Say you have a story where Jesus is going to go into the temple and overturn the tables of the temple because there are money changers in the temple, changing the Roman money into shekels, because the shekels are pure and the Roman money is bad because it has the head of an emperor on it. So that's idolatry. So you can't buy the stuff you need for worshipping in the temple with idolatry money. So it all gets changed into shekels, which are the pure money of for the Jews at that time. And then Jesus comes in and he overturns all the tables. When you're doing the spiritual exercises, you're going to visualize the whole scene. You're going to take it beyond just, oh, there's this story that I read. You're going to sit down and like almost have like a little journey. You're in Jerusalem. It's this time of year, so the temperature's like this. It smells like this. These are the sounds you hear. This is what the people are wearing. This is all the coming and going. So you're actually like really picturing yourself in the whole story. So you totally get that first level of meaning because you take it from being like a newspaper report to being like a movie that you have to make in your mind. Where, you know, like a nice documentary, but even better than a movie. Because a movie you can only see it. But when you're doing spiritual exercises, you already see it and hear it in a movie. You can't smell it or feel it. But when you're doing spiritual exercises, you can feel the warmth of the sun, you can feel the breeze, you can smell the goats or the sheep or whatever it is. You're like completely visualizing it so that you really understand and enter into the actual story, and you really gain an understanding what actually happened. What would it have been like to be there then? And actually really put yourself into the story and truly get that literal level. So the next level they have in the Christian exegesis, it does get a bit different from the Remez, like I said, because the Remez, you've got your actual Hebrew text, and a lot of the hints don't have anything to do with the story. They have to do with these letters coming together here. And each letter has a meaning, each letter has a numerical meaning, each letter has a symbolism. You're not doing that, but you're taking that story and you're now thinking of that story as an allegory. And when you think of that story as an allegory, it starts to take the story from then to now. The allegory tells us what we should believe. Quid credes allegoria. The letter shows us what God and our ancestors did. The allegory shows us where our faith is hid. So say it says one thing, but it means another thing. Now, this is a big part of how Christians got Christianity out of the Jewish Bible. And they did it by this process of allegory, where they would read something and they would think, oh, but this is telling us about Christ. That's this is foreshadowing something. That it was through this process of doing these allegories it was a huge part of how they made one person's religion into another religion by seeing that from the eyes of their faith, these texts that meant one thing have come to mean something completely different. To hint, to point to, it is hints. They're pointing to something else. So, from a Christian standpoint, when you're doing that allegorical level, you are always reading the story of salvation, because that's what Christianity is about, right? Salvation. You're reading the story of salvation into each and every story. So it becomes now not just something that happened, but something that inspires our faith. And in the same way for us, whatever is our paradigm that we operate in, when we approach a sacred text, with that eye of faith, with that eye, Paul Tillich said faith is ultimate concern. When we approach a sacred text with that ultimate concern, that eye of faith, we're able to see it in a whole another light. And you can read anything. I mean, a story in the newspaper and anything. If you have a certain faith or a certain belief, everything will reinforce it. Even if you have a very negative belief, like everything's bad, a very nihilistic belief, whatever you read, you can read that into it. But if you have real faith, whatever your faith is, like the monastic fathers were reading the story of salvation into every scripture that they read, because that was how they saw the world, sitting under an eye, coming from that, coming forth from that great awakening that happened in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s. And we've talked in other, you haven't been in it, but you listen to the podcast number 2, the age of Aquarius coming, a great awakening coming, humanity coming out of all this war and turmoil and destroying the earth and conflict and coming together. That belief then can be reinforced by, you can see that in every scripture that you read. And I often do, like the scripture where Jesus says to the Samaritan woman, you worship on this mountain, we worship in Jerusalem. The day is coming and now is when true worshippers will worship in spirit and truth. To us, coming from this awakening, having this profoundly positive and optimistic belief that that we're going to get through this narrow birth canal that is being so painful. We're going to come out into love and peace and harmony and caring for the earth. We see it in that. Oh, Jesus just said in that text that it's all one and we're all going to worship in spirit and truth. Or we'll read, I think it's Ezekiel, that in the days to come, I will put my spirit within you and I will write my law in your hearts. When the days when the law will no longer be only written on tablets of stone, but will be written in our hearts. Because if we have faith in this paradigm shift, oh, it says it there. Since time immemorial, people have prophesied we're going to come into a time when we're all awakening, when the law is written in our hearts. So we can see that in the Upanishads too, that the Upanishads will point us towards what is our ultimate belief. The third level is the moral level. And if any of you read the book Pilgrim's Progress, it was definitely a book that kids read when I was a kid, John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. It's sort of a novel, but it's all the character. It's a morality play. All the characters are a quality. Or like there's a slough of despond where you can get stuck in your despondency, and every place you go to, and every person that you meet in Pilgrim's Progress is the perfect example of the moral level, writing it very overtly that you're going to meet different qualities of yourself. So the moral level shows us what we should do. So if we're going to read that story we first alluded to, where the gods go to the teacher to get teachings, and the teacher tries again and again to fob them off. If we were reading that on the moral level, you'd be like, oh, the ones that got fobbed off by looking in the pool and seeing how handsome they are, that's this part of me. Like that's the part of me that believes that my form is the ultimate reality. So we can kind of see at the moral level everything in the story we read, any scripture from any tradition, everything in that story is you. It's now become very personal. Everything in the story is you. They're all different parts of you. And now you're going to interpret it much as we interpret a dream. Everything in the story is you. So what is it telling you about what you should do? So we have the literal level, the sight, sound, smells, feels of actually being there. We have the allegorical level, how everything that we read can point to that which we see as ultimately true. We have the moral level where everything in the story is you. And so that story can guide you in your behavior. Quotendas anagogia. The anagogy shows us where we end our strife. The anagogical signals aspects of the spiritual realm to which we are directed. It's the moment when the text is the same thing exactly as that moment when your eyes open and the four letters of the unpronounceable divine name flame before you. It's the same thing as the naughty child or the foolish child who can't even ask a single question, because you're there. It is also becoming a fool at this point. You've stopped delving into it. So back when I was in the Abbey, when we spent a lot of our time every day chanting the Psalms together. Choir to choir, one verse one side, one verse the other side, back and forth. So you went through the whole Psalter, the whole book of Psalms every week. You got very, very familiar with the Psalms. they were like a kind of a basis of your life. Uh, there was it's allocated 7 times throughout the day. Matins, Lauds, Tierce, Sext, Known, Evensong, Compline, 7 times a day. Every day, certain psalms that are chanted. And you understand these on certain levels. So back in the day, they had to chant them all in Latin, which was nobody's language that they spoke. By the time I was there, we were doing it in English. So that at the first level that you're doing it, you're actually just grappling with the words. Can you do this correctly? And it's the same thing when we're doing any Sanskrit chant. The first thing is, can we just like get the right letters with the right sounds and actually chant it correctly? Om Trayambakam Yajamahe Sugandham Pushtivardhanam Urvarukamiva Bandhanan Mrityor Mukshi Amamritat. I can tell you one time Sadananda and I spent an hour with the foremost Kirtanka in southern Maharashtra learning how to say the word Ram correctly. So we weren't going Ram, 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 Ram. We were saying it correctly. And we worked with him until he approved the way we said Ram. It's a very important word for us. So that's part of the literal level, is just, first of all, can you do the words right? Then we create as allegoria. Now when you're chanting it, can you think about what it's indicating to you? Can you chant it and think about it? Pay attention to it. What's it really saying? Then moralis. I'm chanting this psalm today, just like how when we pick our angel cards, right? What's it telling me about how I'm going to carry on today? What's the meaning of this for my life today? But ultimately, you still have, like, you can't actually get to where all the sisters stop chanting because they went, because you have to keep this, like, sweet voices chanting quiet, or it has to keep going. But it gets to a point where it's just kind of like happening, and it's kind of like reading it. But you're in deep contemplation. You've gone into that spiritual meaning which has gone beyond the words. You enter and taste the spirit which is always available in every scripture. In every scripture of every religion, that it all has that same taste. It's all one taste. They all taste of the spirit. Okay. So I'm going to stop recording here.
Thank you for tuning in to Ayurveda and Spirituality with Alakananda Ma. We hope today's exploration has ignited a spark of curiosity and insight within you. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave us a 5-star review and share it with a friend. For more enlightening discussions and practical wisdom on Ayurveda and spirituality, subscribe and join our Facebook group, Alundi Ayurveda. To allow us to continue sharing valuable content, consider donating to Alundi Ashram. The links will be in the show notes. Until next time, may you walk the path of Ayurveda with grace and embrace the light of spiritual wisdom in your journey.
Traya